Good day, bear fans. Welcome, coyote fans, and welcome to part 4 of the Tilton clutch install. I've got my hydraulic throwout bearing. I'm just getting ready to install that. So I've got the Bellhousing installed on the engine along with the clutch, and I have to do some measuring next, but this is how I got to here. So tune in to follow. Alright, so here we are. I've developed this system just for my own mounting of this Willwood. There's this huge hole in this casting that I'm taking advantage of, and I'm putting a 1/2-inch bolt through, and there happens to be a hole roughly in that steel right there that I'm taking advantage of. So I just sort of drilled that hole out with one of these beautiful. If you don't have a bit like this, you're not going to make it through a coyote swap or a bear swap, in my opinion. There's just so many times when you need to enlarge a hole. There was an oval hole here already, and the end of it was roughly where I needed to put this bolt. So I just drilled it out in the steel frame. I had to trim all of the edges off the steel frame for this to really work right. And I need, after this will pinch actually and kind of hold this thing in place. But there's a pivot here. There's a little bit of adjustment here, and what I plan on doing here for adjustment is, if I need this arm to move more toward me, okay, in this direction, I can get a longer bolt and just add nuts as necessary. If I need it closer to the floor, and I don't know if you can see it, but it's going to stick up toward me probably another 1/2 inch higher than the brake pedal, which is okay. I kind of like the clutch a little bit more toward me. It's used only by my left foot, so that's the plan. Going from the relative distance that I have in my GT, that's the way I'm going to do it. However, to get this right, this particular thing here right, I'm going to start here, weld this in place. If I need that clutch pedal more toward the floor, about 1/4 of an inch here, watch what happens on the end. I can move it about 1/4 of an inch, and you'll see how much I gained. Oops, yeah, I gained a huge amount there. Oh boy. Like, that's overkill. I doubt I'll ever need it that close to the floor because it hits here. Okay, so like I said, I'm going to start about here. I'm just going to weld this in place where it is. And remember, this is really adjustment. Once I tighten this nut down and it squeezes the main part of this frame against this steel part, this is really doing light duty. It's not doing anything more than just kind of positioning. The vast majority of the tension will be taken by that jam nut there. Anyways, that's where I'm at. So once I've welded this in place, I'll have my clutch master cylinder mounted. Now the slave cylinder is over here, and Tilton has a whole bunch of instructions measuring the distance from the bell housing to the prongs there. Basically, you have to figure out the initial height of the clutch master cylinder. Once you've set that properly and mounted it and put the transmission together, you then bleed using your clutch master cylinder, you hope. If you've done it properly, you bleed and get all the fluid in the system and all the air out, and you need a person to help you at that point. I'll probably enlist my wife to set some kind of jam nut mechanism to keep it's a stop. You have to have a hard stop so that this arm cannot swing too far, and I've got to decide how I'm going to do that. Haven't done that yet, so that's my next problem to solve. Alright, I'm pretty happy with the way it turned out, other than I really could use a slightly longer bolt here, which I probably can just shop for, but it's a little late now anyway. I welded this one in place. But anyways, it doesn't matter. It's more than overkill for this job. Don't forget, this is bolted in with 4 bolts and not hanging off of a vise like I've got it right now. This is bending it some. I don't like that. Oh well. Anyways, My brake pedal action is where it should be for a GT. I don't know if you can see it, but I basically had to weld up this brake pedal. I've got another video that shows that. This all is adjustable now, the way I want it, and now I just need to put my Willwood remote fluid thing in place and get this thing, get the transmission together, and the clutch slave cylinder and throwout bearing set to Tilton factory spec. We're making progress. All right, this is part 4. In the series of videos on how to do a Tilton clutch on your Barra, probably something else too. At this point, my clutch is installed and torqued to spec. However, the clutch master cylinder, slave cylinder, or I'm trying to remember, throwout bearing, I think they call it hydraulic throwout bearing, is not installed yet. And in order to do this properly, I need to pop the bell housing off of this transmission and mount it to the motor so I can get a distance. So that's the first thing we're going to do here. Alright, well, we got the bell housing off the transmission and onto the motor slightly. It's just sitting here. It's not really bolted to it yet. One of the issues is the starter. Starter bolts in to the bell housing from the back in a really odd location. This connector here, this starter solenoid wire, I had to kind of make a small jumper because the Barra wiring harness has a connector, a blade connector like this, and I mean I could adapt it and put a screw here, but I kind of like the blade connector for disconnecting. When you have to service this thing at some point, it'd be nice to be able to just pull the starter without having to get that screw, given where it's located. So I went to a little bit of trouble for that. And onward, we're going to now bolt the bell housing and the starter to the engine. Alright, so this is the issue I'm up against now. Checking this distance, this is a small block Ford starter. It may not be obvious until you really look here. In order for me to get the solenoid in the same spot, I'm going to have to take apart this new starter and clock the mounting holes about 60 to 90 degrees, or 120 to 90 degrees this way, so that solenoid's in roughly the same spot. So that's this. Alright, clocking that thing was extremely easy. There's 3 Allen head bolts on the front of it, and I just pulled them out, turned it about 120 degrees, and now it fits here. And this bore here is extremely tight. Apparently it's a spec. So next step is to mount that starter bell housing together. Alright, got the starter bolted on, and you can see my little jumper here. This is the way that's going to work. I can just plug the jumper into the starter wire. See, I'm not going to do it right now because I got to have 2 hands. Anyways, this register that this thing sits into is extremely tight. You either get it right or you're not going to get the starter on correctly. I got it right. I was surprised at how tight that is. Bell housing is bolted to the transmission. Now I have to measure this distance from the tangs to here, and I plan on putting a piece of metal across this faceplate here, and use some dial calipers that I got to measure to this face here. This is where they call the springs. This is the things that push your clutch out whenever you push your foot on the pedal. So there's that distance there, and then complementing that, I have to measure from this face here to the clutch, the throwout bearing, hydraulic throwout bearing, HTB. Okay, so I have to screw that thing on here and get it so that there's an 1/8 of an inch clearance, if I remember correctly in the documentation. When you put this thing in to the transmission, there should be about an 1/8 of an inch clearance to the springs from the top of the hydraulic throwout bearing. So I'm going to cut part 4 here. Part 5, I'll discuss the measuring, or I should show the measuring and then mounting of that throwout bearing in the transmission. So hope you're enjoying the series. I'm taking it slow. It's not my normal thing to install a clutch. I'm going by the documentation to the letter. I want to thank Tilton Engineering for being patient with me.